Hey, Doris. Hi, it's excellent to see you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Hello, Rabbi.
Hi, Lois. How are you?
I'm well. How are you?
Good. Very good. Thank you.
So who do we got today?
So far, we have Doris and you online, and we have Chana and Lynn and Jason in our studio audience. Liz is not here this week,
Right,
but,
I know. Thank you.
but we have our otherwise regular studio audience members.
Hi, all.
Hi. That's correct. Okay. There is a question, a conundrum, a puzzle that is a question about Hanukkah. And that question is, how do you spell it? That is an even more deep and impenetrable question than the one I'm about to mention. How do you spell it? Yes.
C-H.
That's one of several hundred possibilities.
Oh, it's a distinct possibility.
Yes, it is. But all right. So the puzzle is this: how come there are 8 days? This is how it's the question is asked. How come there are 8 days of Hanukkah? After all, the miracle is really only 7 days because they had enough oil for 1 day. So if you're going to celebrate the miracle days, the unexpected, then we should be only celebrating 7 days and not 8 days. I'm pretty sure you shouldn't right now.
I did.
You did.
And was successful.
You did. Okay. So the question is, why are there 8 days if the miracle is really only a miracle of 7 days? For that question, there are well over 100 answers. I know that because somebody wrote a book with 101 answers to that question, different takes on it, and there are really a lot more. It spurs lots of interesting discussion about Hanukkah. Well, you succeeded. You got Rachelea to come on. Okay. Yeah, so one of the answers to this question is mentioned in the book of Maccabees. The book of Maccabees is a book written by Jews around the time of Hanukkah, but it was not considered a holy Jewish text. It was not included in Tanakh or considered a venerable work within any Jewish canon. And so we don't have the original Hebrew of the text. There are Christians who've included it in their canon. So you have the book of Maccabees in Christian canon without, again, an original Hebrew. I think there was Aramaic, there was Greek at some point, there must have been Latin at some point. Eventually there became English about this book. And so it's out there. It's what we would call apocrypha. But one of the problems of something that, even if it's written by Jews about an event that happened to Jews, and you'd be sort of interested in what's in that book because of that, One of the problems is because it wasn't considered an important Jewish text, it doesn't have a lot of treatment by Jewish scholars. In fact, modern times people write a little bit about it. You can find it online. It does, though, seem to have been read by Jewish scholars. Rabbi Yosef Karo makes reference to material that's in it. And there are others who there are elements of the Hanukkah story, stuff about Yehuda, Judah Maccabee, and people like that, and some stories which I was told in day school, and a lot of people are told about what happened during those times, and some of them appear to come from the Book of Maccabees. So Jews have read it, throughout history, but it doesn't get the treatment that a serious Jewish work would get over time. Again, it doesn't have the original Hebrew text, doesn't have commentaries on it. But in the Book of Maccabees, it suggests that the reason that Hanukkah was 8 days is because during the wars, during the battles, they weren't able to richly celebrate Sukkot, which is an 8-day holiday. And so when it came to Hanukkah, it was close enough to Sukkot time. They felt like they wanted something that, at least in spirit, would help them celebrate what they missed out on Sukkot. So again, it doesn't mean they celebrated an actual Sukkot at the time when they decided to celebrate Hanukkah, but the fact that it's 8 days, and who knows what else they may have brought into their original celebration over there. But that's why it's 8 days. This is mentioned in some lists. Rabbi Yosef Karo's list, he mentions it in some lists of why Hanukkah is 8 days in answer to that original question. But it's not mentioned as the answer. It's only mentioned as an answer, one of many as to why it's 8 days. I don't know why it's not the answer. If you're going to read that book and you think that book does have factual discussion in it, and it happens to say that, and it seems to have been written by people around that time, I don't know why it's not considered the answer to the question. It is not, but it is an answer, and it's made it into vetted lists of explanation. And because of that, I feel like I can say the following. One of the themes of Sukkot, one of the very important themes of Sukkot, is trust in God, faith, emunah. The schach is called in some contexts Sela Dehenusa, the shadow or the shade of emunah. And emunah in the context of the sukkah seems to mean trust. That word emunah, depending on where you find it, could sometimes mean belief or belief system. But here, in this context, it seems to mean more like trust. The fact that you're willing to go outside into a structure which is not as solid as your house, and experience the world from that more vulnerable position, that's a demonstration of trust in God, that He's looking out for you, and that He's the one who protects you. So this is an important reason given for the sukkah, and therefore it's an important part of the experience of Sukkot, which is trust in God. You would imagine that at Hanukkah, especially the people who are beginning the fight against the Assyrian Greeks, that the most prominent aspect of service of God that's being asked of them is trust in God. Now, you are put in a position where the outcome is unclear, and probably a favorable outcome seems unlikely, and you are forced to put yourself in God's hands to trust that you're going to make the beginning of an effort and somehow God's going to turn it into victory. You don't think about trust right off the bat as an important part of the service, the Avodas Hashem on Hanukkah, but I am suggesting that the fact that they made that connection between Sukkot and Hanukkah allows us to extend this as part of the service, to suggest that one of the focuses that we're supposed to have when we are celebrating Hanukkah is trust in God. At the end of this week's Torah portion, this Torah portion covers a lot of ground. Begins with Yosef and his brothers as young as kids, and then the brothers selling Yosef down to Egypt, and Yosef's initial Egypt experience. He ends up in prison. While he's in prison, he becomes he gets responsibilities in the prison, and at some point meets the wine steward and the baker of the officer of the bakery in the prison, and then they tell him these dreams that they've had, and he interprets the dreams. At the end of the wine steward's telling of the dream, Joseph interprets it and tells him he's going to be reinstated, and then asks him to remember to talk to Paro about Yosef. Maybe he can get him out of prison. So the Midrash suggests that it was an overreach. He showed a lack of faith, a lack of trust in God by asking that of the Sar Hamashkim. And because of that, he ended up having to spend an extra couple of years in prison. Because when we go to the next Torah portion, Paro has a dream, and that suddenly is the impetus for the Sar Hamashkim to tell him about Joseph. He had not told them up until then. So that midrash is really, when you're working on the subject of trust, it's a hard one. It's one that I don't think there's a student of Torah and of midrash that has not been bothered by that midrash. Like, what does it mean? Asking him to put in a good word, how is that an overreach? But again, the subject there is about trust in God. At the end of our Torah portion, it really forces you to take a moment and think about trust in God and what is asked of us when we're told to have trust in God. So I'm thinking of all of these because of the fact that in our everyday lives we're often called upon to trust God, but particularly now with everything that's going on in Israel and around the world, we are particularly being asked at this point to show trust in God. And there's a kernel of what it is to trust in God that has sort of got my focus during this time. And that is the scenario where you pretty much know what you're supposed to do, but you don't see where this is going to go. You don't see how it's going to work, but you do know what you're supposed to do. So in this case, specifically talking about wiping out Hamas, what they call wiping out Hamas. So it seems to be the consensus opinion of wise people that Israel has to wipe out Hamas or do something close to wiping out Hamas. If Israel doesn't do that, then they're just going to reform and come back and do something worse the next time. And they are even, again, I know there's lots of different takes on this and there's lots of discussion on this, and we all have opinions about it. I'm just saying that, from my perspective, it seems like Israel is given, not from the press, but from governments, Israel is being given some leeway to try to do this. It's eventually they're going to have to stop because the pressure is going to get too big, but they are being given leeway by the United States, by France, by Britain, by a lot of other countries. They do seem, even Saudi Arabia and United Arab Emirates and Bahrain and some of these other places seem to be giving them the opportunity to do this, to wipe out Hamas. I was mentioning to Rabbi Becher a couple of weeks ago that it seems like, according to several opinions, that wiping out Hamas is a fulfillment of the mitzvah to wipe out Amalek. That the Torah says in two places to remember Amalek and to wipe them out. And there are opinions that would suggest that wiping out Hamas is in fact wiping out Amalek. We had there is Reb Chaim Soloveitchik was of the opinion that the Rambam holds that if a nation declares that they are a dedication to wiping out Jews, and especially in this case, wiping out the Jews in the land of Israel, that itself is an indication that they're Amalek. So when I was having this conversation with Rabbi Becher, he then sent me a quote from the Pirkei de Rebbe Eliezer, which might be the earliest written oral law that we have, which is Midrash from Rebbe Eliezer ben Horkanus, where he writes that there was a point where descendants of Edom, which is where Amalek comes from, mixed in with Yishmael. Somehow they mixed into Yishmael. So, and he also had a quote from the Zohar about this, that it's possible there are elements of Yishmael that could be Amalek, even in the Zohar as well. But the fact that they declare that they do want to wipe out the Jews, at least in Israel, and that itself already is an indication of it. And then there's the possibility of it, as mentioned in these other places, that they really could be from Amalek. So that means that there is a real possibility that this war against Hamas, the war in Gaza, is a fulfillment of the mitzvah to wipe out Amalek during this time. Also, there's the language of Israeli leaders, including Netanyahu. Netanyahu has quoted this thing about Amalek with reference to Gaza. He has also quoted it with reference to Iran before, that he thinks of them as Amalek. But also this language that you hear from generals and from other Israeli government officials, that you have to wipe out every single one of them. That's Amalek language. It's Amalek language. So, but even if you don't have, and I haven't heard any great rabbinical figures announcing that this is the mitzvah of wiping out Amalek, that we have to do it. I think almost every Jew believes that it's still what we have to do. That pragmatically, that we have to wipe them out so that they will not reemerge as a threat to the people. So we know what to do. This is not always the case with trust. A lot of times when we're faced with challenges about trust, we're not sure what to do. And when we make a choice about what to do, that's part of the anxiety. Not only are we not sure what the outcome is going to be, but we're not even sure that our choice is the right choice. But here, we're in a situation where we are acting and we're pretty sure this is what we're supposed to do. What we don't see is how this can work. This is one of those things. We don't see how it can work. How are you going to find all these people? We don't see it. How are you going, who is going to run it after you destroy them? We have no idea. What's going to be the thing about anti-Semitism, down the line? Europe's becoming, more Muslim. And it's only a matter of time before they are dominated by voices that are anti-Israel and anti-Jewish, and et cetera, et cetera. As you start to go down the rabbit hole of trying to picture or imagine what the outcome will be, then we find ourselves almost paralyzed with anxiety and fear because we don't see how this can possibly work. We know what we're supposed to do, but we don't know how this can work. I'm suggesting to you that this is the situation that the early Jewish revolutionaries, the ones who are eventually going to bring about the recapture of the Beit HaMikdash, the rededication of the Beit HaMikdash, and eventually the independent commonwealth of the Jewish people, the ones we call Hashmonaim or the Maccabees, those early revolutionaries were in a very similar position. They don't seem to have much choice. They feel like they've got to fight back, but there's no clear vision of how their fighting back is going to lead to victory. It is, even in the history of military ventures, it's considered one of the most remarkable, that they were able to, as such limited underdogs, overcome an army that was considered to be so vaunted. And certainly when they're engaged in it, they don't know where it's going to end. And this is a kind of scenario for trust. You know what you need to do, or you're at least pretty sure about what you need to do, but you have no guarantee of success, and you can't even picture success. So I'm suggesting that if we accept the notion that one of the themes of Hanukkah is trust, and again, I'm borrowing from that connection to Sukkot in order to say that, but that one of the themes of Hanukkah would be trust, and certainly it should be, just looking about, at the experience that they had, thinking about the war, which we're supposed to do, and the miracles of the wars. So this is a special scenario for trust, where you know what you're supposed to do, but there's no sense that it's going to be able to lead to victory, and that somehow you have to trust in God at that point. What does it mean to trust in God at this point? What it means is to do what you're supposed to do, to focus on what you know to do and what you're supposed to do, and to not concern yourself about more than that. I mean, you do as much as you can do, and then you leave the rest of it to God. You at some point, as the Jewish nation found itself in the 6-Day War, they in a similar kind of situation where they had no choice. They have to fight. Suddenly they're fighting, and before you know it, the possibility of taking back the Harabais, taking back the Temple Mount, emerges. They weren't even thinking of doing that. That wasn't anybody's plan, and they were just fighting because you have to fight, because they're put in a situation where there's no choice. And they came up, as that is going on, suddenly things become revealed to you, and you see that, if we do a preemptive strike against Egypt, and we do this and that, and then they're doing that, and before you know it, stuff is happening. They're in the midst of something, and then all sorts of new possibilities emerge and become real. Now, but in order to get to that point, you had to be willing to engage you have to be willing to act in the first part. And that, so in this case, again, what is the point of trust in this case? The point of trust is that you're able to fully do what you need to do. You're able to fully do what you need to do without the burden of understanding how it's all going to play out. I know it is considered folly to engage in a military campaign where you don't have an exit strategy. It's considered foolish to like the United States when we went into Iraq and other times. This is something, it's just considered folly, and people are bringing it up. They've been bringing it up since the beginning. What's the exit strategy? Who do you imagine is going to be the government after this? Why do you think you're going to go in and manage Gaza? And you hear ridiculous things, coming out of the mouths of Israeli politicians. Yeah, we're going to go in and run Gaza or something like that. I mean, they didn't know. They still don't seem to articulate what a next stage is, but that's not always possible. When you're fighting an existential battle, it's not always possible to say, I'm only going to engage in this when I have a clear exit strategy for doing it. This is an existential struggle, and in an existential struggle, you have to take whatever steps you know how to take when you do, and then you have to trust. And this is one of those things, again, with Hanukkah, I am suggesting to you that would have had to be there, and certainly seems to have been there in the descriptions that we're reading of their struggle against the Assyrian Greeks at the time. This struggle, we don't just read about this struggle as an interesting point of history. We read about it as a way to serve God. When we read about Hanukkah, this is a model for service of God. These people were engaged in a heroic service of God when they did what they did. And we are learning from them, so that when we get put into situations like this, we will also be able to properly serve God. And that means that it could be with actual battle like it is today, or it could mean in our own lives with something metaphorically, a kind of battle that we're put up to. But we are not just reading about a history and celebrating something that happened a long time ago, there was a certain kind of service of God that was modeled for us, and we are learning from it in order to practice it. And right now we are practicing it. Right now we are engaged in a struggle that is not unlike the struggle of Hanukkah. And one of the things that is required of us is to trust in God. Yisrael B'tach B'Hashem. Israel, trust in God. And trusting in God means that you're willing to act in the way that you believe you need to act, even without knowing what the outcome should be. There may be and other kinds of situations, and again, the Yosef situation is an indication of this. There may be times when it's not clear what you're supposed to do, if you're supposed to act. And there's a whole school of thought about what is the proper path when you're in a situation like that. But we're not in that situation. It doesn't seem like we're in a situation where almost everybody agrees what we're supposed to do. The only question, and a lot of times, and this is something that I hear a lot, and I'm sure you all hear a lot, that people find themselves paralyzed with anxiety and fear because of the available discussion online and social media and amongst their friends about anti-Semitism and the reverberations of what's going on and the different people that are accusing us of being
genocidal.
Yeah, it's interesting, by the way, that word genocide is we're being accused of genocide. It may very well be that if this is the mitzvah of wiping out Amalek, it is a kind of genocide. I mean, everybody, when a few weeks before the discussion, before October 7th, just a few weeks before, I was having this argument with my son Sruli about Amalek. He brought it up at a Chulent Shmooze. And our Chulent Shmoozes tend to have questions that can lead to a lot of raucous discussion, a lot of yelling back and forth and people disagreeing, because that's the atmosphere of our Chulent Shmoozes. It's mostly young men who like to shout at each other. So this came up, and how could, the Torah include genocide, and why would God ask us to do genocide? And at the time, my argument wasn't that we're not being asked to do genocide. My argument with him was, why is that different than any other war? In every war, there are innocent civilians that are killed. There's no war where innocent civilians aren't killed. Why isn't he bothered by all wars? But anyways, we're having that discussion back and forth. And then when this happened and we're into it, I said to Sruli, you do realize that we're in the scenario. We were having a theoretical argument a few weeks ago. Now we're in the scenario where we're being accused of genocide because of the killing of innocent women and children in a situation that may actually be the mitzvah of wiping out Amalek. So we might actually be living this, and it's terrifying. It's, again, terrifying as to where it's going to go. I don't want innocent people killed. Every time I hear about another Palestinian civilian that is killed, a shock goes through my body. I don't want to hear. I don't want it to be. I don't want it to exist. I don't want it to happen. But this is part of the trust. This is also part of the trust. Part of the trust is that this is what we're supposed to be doing. And even with all the noise and all the energy and all the pushback from it, that we're supposed to be doing this right now. Obviously, we're supposed to try to do it without killing people that are innocent. We're supposed to try. But we're also and this, again, this is not just me suggesting it. The wise people who run our army and make the military decisions, and even wise people around the world recognize that these people need to be wiped out. The Hamas, the terrorists need to be wiped out, and that there will be, this was the discussion from the beginning, there will be lots of innocent people that end up dying because of it, but they still need, the core thing needs to happen. So being able to stay on course, to follow through on this is our work. How it's going to turn out is not our business. It's not our business for sure. It may be the Israeli government's business to try to figure it out, but the fact that they don't have the answer is also not necessarily, I mean, we have precedent, and we are celebrating that precedent. For many people, Hanukkah is about light and darkness and gifts and comfort and all sorts of other things. But at the core of it, there was a war, a revolution against a force that was, according to our tradition, bent on wiping us out in some manner, spiritually at least. And it was a war. These were soldiers. I was once in a taxi in Israel, and the taxi driver was he was saying to me his theory about why there's not a tractate for Hanukkah. There's a tractate for almost every holiday, but there's not a tractate for Hanukkah.
How often do you get these discussions in a taxi in the United States?
One time I had a discussion about Islam with a Pakistani taxi driver.
Okay.
But you're right, yeah. But anyway, so and also you get, these are often, like taxi drivers, but they're often like really interesting conversations. They're not just a guy telling you his opinion. So anyway, so he said to me, you know why there's no tractate for Hanukkah? He said, because if there was a Masachet Hanukkah, yeshiva boys would want to go into the army.
That's so interesting.
And he said, this is his theory. His theory is they didn't want yeshiva boys to go into the army. He's talking, obviously, 1,500 years ago. They didn't want yeshiva, this is the thing, they don't want yeshiva boys going to the army. Then he told me the yeshiva boys should go into the army. He himself is a religious man who was in the army. Mm-hmm. And then he has a whole story about how he was like the only religious guy in his unit. And so he said it was during, I think it was the Yom Kippur War, but they were down by Egypt. And their unit and two other units were pinned down. There was shooting coming from Egyptians. But for some reason, all the shooting was going to these other two units, and their unit wasn't actually getting fire. They're like hit, there's, I don't know what they're behind to protect themselves, but there's like, I don't know how far away another unit, and then farther away another unit, and they're all being fired at. And finally, somebody from one of the other units yells to them, how come they're not shooting at you? Why are they only shooting at us? And so the guys in his unit yelled out, seat. He's wearing tzitzit. They're pointing to his, to my taxi driver. He's protecting us. His tzitzit are protecting us. Anyway, so he was saying, this is, when you have religious guys in the army, you can impact the people, his friendships that he has with these people, and the fact that they always recognized this, sort of looked up to the fact that he was a religious guy. And anyway, so he was suggesting it's a mistake for the yeshiva boys not to be in the army. But he said the tractate, if there was that was his theory. If there was a tractate for Hanukkah, then Jewish boys would want to go fight, because that is a part of the story. A lot of focus goes to the miracle, and but that's not when we sing Al Anisim, when we pray Al Anisim in davening and in Birkas Hamazon, we're talking about the military victory over there, and certainly this is the hugest theme. I remember once asking Moshe Shapiro, blessed memory, why is it that the rabbis of the Talmud didn't write a competing history to Josephus? In the end, Josephus is the most impactful ancient history of the Jews. Why is that? They could have written a competing one. So he said to me, what's the problem with Josephus? So he was clearly baiting me. I mean, I thought, well, he's going like, what's the problem with Josephus? I said, first of all, he was a Benedictine. He's a turncoat. He was a Jewish general who eventually went over to the side of the Romans. And second of all, he doesn't represent the religious component of the story. So, like, for example, Hanukkah, he doesn't mention the Hanukkah miracle with the menorah. So he said to me, you also wouldn't have mentioned the Hanukkah miracle. If you had been writing the history from then, you wouldn't have written about it. You would have just written about the military. You would have been writing about the wars. That's what you would have thought was the most amazing thing that happened. You would also not tell the story of the miracle. The miracle is something that it took somebody to realize was the symbol of everything that had happened. That this fact that the lights continued to light, that was a kind of doorway to the fact of God's miraculous intervention, and also perhaps a kind of window into the broader meaning of everything that was going on. It's certainly not only about military victories, but it's very much about military victories. And even
Rabbi?
the focus, yeah.
Yeah. Speaking of Josephus, I'm wondering if the Jewish community at the time of the war against the Romans was considered as much of an existential, if that was something we also felt we had to do, and maybe we weren't supposed to, given what happened.
He's writing before Bar Kokhba, but he's writing.
Yeah, but even
after
apart from him, that war,
Yeah.
was perhaps
sort of interesting that he. I guess it's interesting in the milieu that he was in that he did write those detailed histories of the Hanukkah wars. You'd think that would be a very sensitive subject to be writing about during the time of the Romans. Yeah, so just to review, what I'm suggesting is that as part of our Hanukkah, our avodas Hashem, our service of God during Hanukkah, one of the things that it is appropriate to focus on is the trust in God that would have been required of the people when they first begin their revolt against the Assyrian Greeks, and the miracles that happen afterwards are meant to indicate that it's that original trust is rewarded, and that what God is asking us is to act when it's necessary to act, even if we can't see what is going to come of it. Maybe that's even without a light that shows us what's going to come of it, but eventually we get shown, but it's not there at the beginning. And certainly this is the experience that we're having right now. We're in the midst of a battle where we know what we need to do, but so our avodas Hashem is to trust, to continue to do what we're supposed to do, even if there is all sorts of opportunity to become paralyzed with anxiety and fear, or to to sort of give in to the pushback that that we're feeling. All right, that's that. All right, be well. I look forward to schmoozing with you about something way more upbeat next week. It will be, it'll still be Hanukkah.
Hanukkah.
It'll be
Yes.
Hanukkah, and we could talk about something way more upbeat.
Oh,
Rochelle,
thank you.
it's excellent to see you. Doris, it's excellent to see you. Lois, it's excellent to see your avatar.
Yes.
Thank
Be
you,
well.
Lynn, for
My
reminding me.
avatar thanks you.
You're welcome. What did you say, Rochelle?
I said, thank you, Lynn, for reminding me about class.
Yes. Lynn did break some rules in doing that, where she made an actual phone call during the class to get you on.
Text would also work.
That's not happening. That's not happening. All right, be well. Okay.
Bye.
Bye-bye, guys. Bye-bye.